Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural Waste360 Nothing Wasted podcast with me, Liz Bothwell from Waste360, and Michele Nestor, president of Nestor Resources and chair of the board of directors of the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center at Penn State, among other things. Hi, Michele. Are you ready?
I am, Liz. Thanks for having me here today.
Oh, thank you so much for agreeing to be our first guest. We're very excited to have this conversation. Well, first off, since you're from Pennsylvania, I have to ask, are you an Eagles or a Steelers fan?
Steelers Nation all the way. I am on that side of the state, and I probably just alienated, half the population. But there's a river that runs through our state, the Susquehanna, and you could pretty much determine the fans on east or west of that river.
Oh, well, I can't blame you. And I'm an Eagles fan, but I will not hold it against you because Pennsylvania's strong. So please tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in this amazing industry.
Well, my background and how I got into this industry, it was a fluke, I will say. I have a background in information, library science, and I was doing research for an engineering firm. They invited me to come aboard, and they told me I had no idea what my job was going to be, but that I would figure it out. And so I had some great mentors. And I took regulatory compliance and was organized enough to run projects, and then dabbled around in the industry with some private waste management companies so that I learned that way. And then one day I just decided to take the plunge and go out on my own and walk away, from the corporate environment. And 20 some years later, here I am, and I'm glad I made that move. So it wasn't planned. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's great. We hear that a lot with people who enter this industry. It just happened on a fluke, and then they find their home. And like you said, decades later, here you are.
Right. I mean, it was an evolving industry. I mean, it still is. And there's lots of opportunity. And I think we're right on the cusp again of seeing a lot of changes in our industry if people latch onto them. I'm a firm believer in reinventing yourself maybe every 5 to 10 years anyhow. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're younger and somewhere mid in your career, it's time to step back and take a look at what's going on out here, because you might be able to broaden your horizons a little.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned changes, and what a great time to be in this industry. What kind of changes are you seeing, and what opportunities are you seeing out there?
Well, I think we're starting to take a look at, and this is going to be a little slower, but it's still a change. And we've always looked at the end of the pipeline. So, and we are waste management professionals, so that's what we do. We take a look at when people discard things or they have no use for them anymore. It becomes our job on what to do with those. But I think we're realizing, when you look at particularly the recycling part of our industry, that unless we do something upstream, it also affects our job. And I mean, the case in point is all the plastics that we have to deal with that really we have no market for. And recycling has, traditionally been, people have collected things in developing countries because they didn't have the natural resources to replace those things, to make other items. where we've legislated recycling and we collect things hoping there's a market. So if we don't look at design for repair and reuse, I think it's going to make the waste and recycling industry's job that much harder, because we're fighting a battle that we can't turn the faucet off.
Right. And do you think with the China and now the India ban, I mean, like you just said, and like you've written recently, that recycling today is not sustainable. Do you think enough time has gone by that we're actually thinking of recycling differently? And are we thinking of it in a solutions-oriented way?
I think we're starting to think of it differently. And, the circular economy should steer us in that direction. I have heard some of our large, corporate waste and recycling companies make the statement that they've just put China behind them, that there's no sense dwelling on it, that what they need to focus on are domestic markets and educating the folks who give us our material. At least still a problem. And we're not the only ones contributing to China and India. I mean, Europe is also. So, we've had the luxury of sending our materials to countries who don't even have an infrastructure to collect their own material. And they certainly have large populations. So I think if we think that's our solution, things aren't going to get better. But if we start looking at new technologies and the kind of products we produce, then I think we stand a chance.
Good. Okay. And you mentioned also the people who are giving us these materials. Do you think education and behavioral change will be a big part of this?
It has to be. We did open the floodgates a little bit by asking them. We catered to convenience, but we also added in some materials that had sketchy markets to begin with. We've always collected plastics 1 and 2 in residential settings, and then we told them they could recycle all plastics, which means that they gave us those plus all the ones they hoped we could recycle too.
Sure.
So, there's always mistakes, but we have to take a step back, accept some of that responsibility. And I think we have a generation that's used to recycling, so hopefully we'll be able to re-educate them too. But it is not easy. It's repetitive.
Sure. What is it? Repetition is the mother of all learning, right?
Sure. Just think about advertising. How many times you have to show a product to somebody before they even notice it? Well, it's the same thing with behavior.
So true. And so while we're on the topic of recycling and plastics as well, you probably won't be surprised by this question, but so few stories have tipped our industry into the mass media frenzy like single-use plastics has.
Sure. California started, I think California caught the industry off guard somewhat. And they had a lot of bills, the municipal, local government level. And then the industry put a lot of cash into trying to stop the statewide ban on things. And then subsequently, they got proactive in a lot of other states. But we are seeing a return of legislators addressing the issue of, straws, plastic bags, takeout containers. And it does do some good. I mean, we've seen, the UK's been ahead of us for a while. And they saw about an 80% drop in the use of plastic bags after they banned it.
Wow.
California is reporting, I think with their last coastal cleanup, about a 72% drop in grocery bags being collected in, and that is something that Keep America Beautiful sponsors, the coastal cleanup. And that is since like 2010. So in just a year of having the ban, they've seen that much of a change. So, it does help. But once again, there's still so many plastics produced that we're just scratching the surface with that. But the bans the bans work, but I am a proponent of no ban without a plan. So you can't start banning things until you understand what's the ramifications of the replacement.
Right.
And some of the replacements have other issues. But it's been a good step.
Okay, good. Yeah, sometimes the attention does bring light to it and can push policy and behavior change. So I'm glad you're seeing that as a positive. But you're right, a ban without a plan isn't really going to get us that far. I've also noticed that you've written and tweeted a lot about e-waste. And what do you think? Are we still dealing with just Bandaid solutions at this point, or is progress being made here as well?
I think, to be honest, I think the industry is trying. And I'm going to say that as somebody who's, actually tried to push for some local legislation and was in the middle of local government and the manufacturers and trying to be a go-between. I will give part of the industry credit for taking steps to take back their own products, but not in the way we think, not just for recycling. They're actually recovering products that can be repaired and refurbished. And it's like a lease program. And I really think that's going to be the future if we want to end e-waste altogether.
A leasing type of program, and then the onus or the payment really would be with the consumer, but in the front end, right? So that you're paying. You explain that to me a little bit, if that makes sense.
So I mean, the consumer always pays, even if it's hidden in the cost of the product. But in a lease program, if you take a look at, say, I can't even, and I subscribe to this, but I can't remember the exact name. But say with your phone, you sign on for like an Apple Forever, an iPhone Forever, a Galaxy Forever kind of program. So you pay a monthly fee that's part of your connection or to use the device. But in like a year or two, you just turn it back in and you get the latest, greatest feature device, and you just keep paying the lease. So you don't have to shell out the whole, $500-600 or $1,000 for a new device to get new technology. You just always get it, or they have the ability to download it for you. And so instead of actually owning things anymore, there is a philosophy that we could go to just owning or using these delivery devices. And it could be right down to automobiles and washing machines and things like that. So it's a way to reduce the waste, because the companies that manufacture these things get to protect their proprietary information because they take them back and fix them. But they also get those raw materials to reuse. Waste, one of the big problems we have out here is the cost to local governments, and the industry does a really good job in paying for the cost of the recovery, taking the materials, getting them to certified recyclers, and to the best of their ability, preventing them from falling into the hands of people that would create nightmares with the environment. But the collection points also have a cost, and that's kind of the line in the sand right now. Is the manufacturers feel like they've covered their cost and that they shouldn't have to pay at the local government end where these things are collected. And that is where I think an advanced recovery fee could help everybody, because we could also pay for some of those costs.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. And then another very popular subject that has garnered a lot of attention lately is food waste, of course. And what do you think? Has our 2030 food loss and waste reduction goal created that entrepreneurial spark many predicted it would in our industry?
Well, there are a lot of people looking at food waste recovery. And, by the time it gets to the consumer, even at the restaurant level, but particularly, once it hits our refrigerator, the environmental issues have peaked at that point, because it's, all the transportation and everything that goes into harvesting the food. It's at the last point it can be. So I'm not sure how many steps we've taken to correct it, but we certainly have created a strong awareness. There's not too many places you can go anymore where somebody's not talking about that. And I think if we could come to agreement on sustainable packaging and labeling, that would be a giant leap right there that could help us. The other parts of food waste go way up the food chain, but when it comes to consumers, and I'm guilty, I'm aware of it, but one of the things I find as a two-person household or somebody who travels and needs to buy things when I'm on the road, it's really hard to buy. We'll go back to the single-use packaging.
Right.
In some respects, that could be a positive when it comes to food waste.
True. Very good point.
And I think we don't look at that as recyclers. We're all about recycling. But if you look to Oregon, and they are definitely setting the example for the country, is we need to start looking at life cycle analysis. And, when is a package bad and when is it good? And being recyclable isn't always the best thing. There's other things that can go into a package that make it better for the environment all the way around.
That's true. I did you just read that article too that came out that about Oregon and how it's a lot of it is the mislabeling and the misunderstanding of the words used, and it's not just that a package is or materials are recyclable. It's should you be using it at all?
Right, exactly. And so, we've created this pressure over the past 30 years on producers to, at least appear green. You better have that recycling symbol on your package. But then in our MRFs, or our material recovery facilities, we're screaming at that end is, why are you sending us these bottles or cans or things that look like this when they're not really recyclable at all? They just happen to have some recycled content in it. So we've kind of created this catch-22 that we need to step away from and look at material use, period, I think.
Right. That's a good point. And you're so good on Twitter, by the way. I love reading your tweets. And
Thank you.
One thing I noticed was you really have this genuine sense of optimism when it comes to upcoming generations. So just wanted your thoughts there. How do you think they'll view sustainability, and what do you see them doing to influence policymakers?
Well, I have to have hope in young generations, because if we don't, as somebody who's getting ready to pass the torch, that would be, ultimately depressing to think that you're going to step away from the industry and, nothing's going to end. And also that would be really egotistical. But I think when you see millennials and also Generation Z, they've been faced with some pretty big issues. And particularly when I look at Generation Z, I never looked at it this way before till I started really doing some research. But, I'm a baby boomer, and I was faced with, in hindsight, looking at it now, it's amazing that we all didn't have to go into therapy, because we actually had to train for nuclear bombs supposedly being dropped on us, which
crazy,
was a real step away from reality. But this generation is looking at something that's truly real, a real scare, in that they can already see the effects of horrendous tornadoes and hurricanes and storms and flooding where we didn't have it. So they're looking at their future and saying, we need to do something about this. I think the recent election, even though, they didn't get all the people they backed, but they got a half of the people they backed into office. And there's not even that many of them voting yet. They're too young. So tomorrow will tell the tale of these youngsters actually are going to join this worldwide strike for climate action. And I think what impresses me is they can speak to the issues. They're not just, oh, gee, this is, Live Aid and we're going to go to a concert and act like we're doing something. They can tell you what the issues are. So that's hope.
That is hope. And they seem to be able to pull each other together and really use sort of the masses to get their point across. They don't seem shy about that, which is great. So
they have no barriers. I mean, I'm impressed by that. I mean, we're still struggling as a country right now with, hate and divisiveness. And here we have a generation that doesn't think anything of, reaching out across the globe and talking to somebody. They just don't see that there's any lines. And I would love to be around, in 50 years from now and see what does that make the adult world look like?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Time will tell.
Sure.
Also, too, Michelle, you've done a lot of work with public officials and private companies. What's the biggest challenge you find in bringing them together?
I think there is a lot of misunderstanding when you first start a project in why one side views an issue a certain way or what their needs are. And it's amazing sometimes where, maybe the private sector doesn't understand the constraints of local government or how they have to operate, and they can't just do things a certain way. And I can absolutely guarantee that from the side of local government, it always works better for me if I can pull the officials aside and explain how the private sector looks at their costs, because I always explain, we could do anything you want, but everything has, an incremental cost. It may be 1/100th of a cent, but when they start to understand, well, if I put this constraint in a contract or I want special services, it's my decision then if I can live with that cost. But if they don't understand it, then they feel they're being cheated. So education on that end, just like with our consumers, is a big deal. And opening up the lines of communication and stopping that us against them really gets way better results.
Oh, I bet. So what else should we be paying attention to in our world of waste, recycling, organics? Like, for example, is cannabis waste the next frontier? What are you seeing?
Really, it could be. A lot of those folks take care of that at the source, but as it becomes broader across the country, then, you're going to see some mistakes. I think the industry needs to know how to be prepared for that. I think we're going to see waste to energy grow, but maybe in different forms. I think landfill gas is an underappreciated resource. And I think that we're going to see a lot more use of organics and biomass. So renewables of all different kinds like that is where we're going to have to look. And I also think maybe redefine what we think of as recycling, particularly with plastics. There's a lot of technology out there that can take some of the plastics and turn them into synthetic fuels, instead of worrying about bottle-to-bottle recycling for every single thing we produce.
Sure. There's a lot on the horizon, isn't there? What advice would you give to professionals considering entering this industry, whether they're young or a life change type of decision for the industry?
I think you need to be open-minded, and I for technical people particularly, you need to make yourself a little more well-rounded. I think it's good to hone your communication skills, your writing skills, and to always pay attention to what's going on in other areas. I see a lot of folks in our industry that can recite their state backwards and forward, and that's all they focus on. And so they are caught off guard when industry suddenly hit their state because they had, the blinders on, so to speak. So pay attention to Waste360 and read the articles.
It will definitely keep you updated, right? Now, what keeps you busy outside of work? Do you have any hobbies or interests?
I love to travel, and I love music. So I'm always listening to music, and I'm a cook, but have to curtail that sometimes. So I'm getting toward the end of my career, so I'm enjoying sitting back and being selective about projects and learning what it's going to be like to have a life again. So being able to travel without it being a deadline or something like that is going to be quite enjoyable.
Oh, I bet. And you've earned that. You deserve that. And as you prepare for the next phase of your wonderful life, it must feel great knowing that the industry is more diverse with more women and more young professionals than ever before.
You look on their websites and maybe even if you have a chance to understand who the regional players are, but there are so many women, and just from your 40 under 40, I kind of giggled to myself on the number of vice presidents and regional managers and district managers that, are maybe 35. Right. and it lets you know that these are people that are going to be going places. And I know some of these people, and you can see that they're going to make a big change because they have ambition.
Right. And they believe in their cause, and they want to do good things. And I think back to appreciating the younger generation's interests and their beliefs and their moral compass in this bigger world and our planet. It's very impressive.
Any company who's not bringing some of those people in, even for just brainstorming situations when you're trying to solve a problem or a process improvement, they might not always have the right answers, but the perspective they offer in those meetings are things you've never thought about before. So you might be able to solve it once you hear what the problem really is, because your perspective on why things aren't working might be totally off the mark of what your new customers are, because they represent your new customers.
Right. So true. Great point.
I mean, this is an example right here is this is a change for our industry. 5 or 6 years ago, it was hard still to get companies to consider technology seriously.
Any technology or?
Any technology,
wow.
Right. I mean, they had grown into it somewhat, but and maybe I should say 10 years, there's been a vast change in how customer service is done and communications, and particularly when you start getting down to smaller companies. But when you look, from the vehicles on up, the tools they use. So this is a step right here in just reaching out to folks who communicate certainly differently than other generations did.
Right. Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground. And you have a lot to share. Where can listeners hear more from you? Do you want to share your Twitter handle or your website for them?
Sure. You can see me on Twitter at Michele Nestor.
I've had such a great time talking with you, and I know our listeners will love this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, what an honor to be on your premiere episodes.
and you're
now on my podcast playlist.
There you go. So we will keep you posted on that, and enjoy your podcasts.
Thank you.